Her father's voice carried clear across the Faro Flats saloon floor, thick with whiskey and a false, wheedling bravado she had heard too many times before. "I'm good for it, Kettering. I've got nothing left on the table but my word, and you know my word's worth." "Your word," Cyrus Kettering said, laying his cards face up with the slow satisfaction of a man who had planned this all along, "is worth exactly nothing, Calloway, which is precisely why I proposed the other stake. You put your girl's hand against my $100. I recall that plain enough, and every man at this table heard it plain besides." Ivy Calloway stood frozen in the saloon doorway, having come looking for her father the way she came looking for him most nights now, and understood, in the space of a single indrawn breath, that she had arrived just in time to hear herself gambled away like a sack of grain. "Papa?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to, though the whole room had already turned to look at her, several men with the particular ugly interest of those enjoying someone else's ruin. "Tell me you didn't." Warwick Calloway would not meet her eyes. That, more than anything he might have said, told her everything. It was not the first time her father had gambled away something that was not his to lose. He had lost the family's second mule to a game of faro 2 winters back, lost her mother's good silver the spring after that, sold off half their small parcel of land near Faro Flats to cover debts he swore each time would be his last. Ivy had learned, over the years since her mother's death, to keep what little money she earned mending and washing for other families hidden in the lining of her one good coat, because anything left where her father could find it eventually found its way onto a card table. She had never imagined, in all her careful vigilance, that the thing he might one day stake and lose would be her. Cyrus Kettering rose from the table with an unhurried, proprietary smile, the kind of smile a man wears when he believes he has just acquired something valuable and intends to enjoy the acquiring. "Miss Calloway, I believe congratulations are in order. Your father's honored his debt, and I've come to collect what's owed me." "I am not a debt to be collected," Ivy said, though her voice shook now with a fear she could not entirely master. "I am not a stake in a card game, Mr. Kettering, and no promise my father made over a hand of cards binds me to anything." "It binds him," Kettering said, "and a daughter's obligated to her father's debts same as a son's obligated to his in this territory or any other. I'd advise you not to make a scene of it. I've been patient enough already." It was then that a chair scraped back from a table near the window, and a tall man Ivy did not recognize sun-browned, plainly but well-dressed, with the unhurried economy of movement she associated with men who ran cattle for a living rose, and crossed the room with a quiet authority that seemed to still even the saloon's rowdier corners. "I'll buy the debt," he said. Kettering turned, brows raised. "This isn't your business, Mr. Reed Lawton," the man said by way of introduction, though his eyes stayed on Kettering the whole while. "And I'm making it my business. What's the note worth? $100, you said. I'll pay it in full, cash on the table, right now, and you'll consider Calloway's debt settled and this young woman's name struck from whatever ledger you're keeping in that head of yours." Kettering's smile thinned. "And if I don't care to sell?" "Then we'll discuss it with the marshal instead," Reed said, easy as talking about the weather, "because staking a living woman against a card hand is not a debt any court in this territory will honor, and you know it same as I do. I'm offering you an easy $100 and a clean exit from a mess of your own making. I'd take it if I were you." The room had gone very quiet. Ivy stood rigid, unsure whether to feel relief or a fresh species of fear, because she had seen enough of the world to know that men who rescued women rarely did so without expecting something in return, and she was not at all certain she trusted this stranger's motives any further than she had trusted Kettering's. Kettering, weighing the marshal's name against his own comfort, took the money. Reed Lawton had not planned, when he'd stopped into the Faro Flats saloon for a meal and a night's rest before continuing on toward the stockyards, to spend $100 freeing a stranger from a debt that was never rightly hers to begin with. But he had watched enough of the world's cruelty pass by without his interference to know the exact moment when a man's conscience simply would not allow him to keep sitting still. And the sight of Ivy Calloway standing straight-backed and terrified while two men argued over her like livestock had been exactly such a moment. He found her outside a few minutes later in the cool evening air past the saloon's noise, her arms wrapped around herself though the night was not especially cold. "Miss Calloway, I hope you'll forgive the interference. I couldn't stand by and watch." "I don't know what you want from me," she said, and there was steel beneath the wariness in her voice, a woman who had learned to expect a price attached to every kindness. "If you think buying that note makes some claim on me in Kettering's place, I'll tell you plainly, Mr. Lawton, I won't be owned by any man, bought fair or bought cheap." "I don't want to own you," Reed said, and something in the plain, unoffended steadiness of his answer seemed to catch her off guard. "I paid that debt to see it ended, not transferred. You're not obligated to me for so much as a thank you, Miss Calloway, let alone anything more. I'd have done the same for any soul I saw treated so, man or woman, and I'll ride on tomorrow same as I planned if that's your preference." "Why would you spend $100 on a stranger you mean to simply ride away from?" He considered the question honestly. The way she was coming to understand was his particular habit. Because $100 is a poor price for a man's conscience, and cheaper still for the chance to watch a cruel man like Kettering lose something he thought he'd already won. I won't pretend I didn't take some satisfaction in that part. Despite herself, despite the whole ruinous evening, Ivy felt the corner of her mouth twitch toward something like a smile. Her father found her later that night, sober enough by then to be ashamed, though not sober enough, she suspected, to stay that way past morning. "Ivy, I never meant for it to come to that. I was certain I held the winning hand." "You are always certain, Papa," she said, too tired for anger, "right up until you've lost everything worth keeping. Mama's silver, the mule, now this. I begin to wonder what's left for you to lose that isn't a piece of me." He had no answer for that, and she did not wait for one, walking back toward the boarding house alone in the dark, carrying the whole weight of a grief that had nothing to do with any card game and everything to do with a father who had never once, in all her 21 years, put her welfare above his own next hand of cards. She did not expect him to still be in Faro Flats 3 days later. He had told her he'd ride on, and she had believed him, and had spent those 3 days in the small rented room she shared with her father wondering, with a confusion she did not enjoy, why she found herself faintly disappointed each morning that he had not called on her. He had stayed, she learned from the boarding house keeper, on some pretext of business with the stockyards that seemed thinner with each passing day, and when she finally encountered him again at the mercantile, buying rope he did not obviously need, she found herself asking before she could stop herself, "Are you following me, Mr. Lawton?" "I'm making poor excuses to remain in a town with no particular business left for me," he admitted, plain as ever. "I told myself I only wanted to be certain Kettering didn't make further trouble for you. I've since concluded I was lying to myself about the whole of my reasons. And the truth? The truth is I haven't been able to stop thinking about a woman who stood in the middle of a saloon full of men and told the lot of them she wasn't property, with more courage in that one sentence than most folks manage in a lifetime. I'd like to know you better, Miss Calloway, if you'd allow it. Not as a debt owed. Only as a woman I find I cannot stop admiring." Ivy studied him a long moment, weighing his words against the plain evidence of his conduct these past days. No pressure, no presumption, only an honest, patient admission that asked nothing beyond permission. "My father drinks away every dollar this family ever has," she said finally, "because if he wanted to know her, he ought to know the whole truth of her circumstances. I've spent my whole life cleaning up messes that weren't mine to clean. I don't have much to offer a man beyond hard work and plain speaking." "That's considerably more than most men have to offer in return," Reed said. "I own land near the stockyards outside Faro Flats, cattle enough to keep a family fed through any winter, and a house that's been too quiet for want of anyone worth filling it with. I'm not offering you rescue, Miss Calloway. I'm offering you the chance to choose freely whether you'd like to know a man who has no interest in owning anything he hasn't earned the honest way. The weeks that followed unfolded slow and careful, courtship built on the plain foundation of shared suppers and long talks on the boarding house porch, Reed never once presuming further than she permitted, Ivy finding, with each passing week, that the wariness she'd carried since childhood loosened a little more in his company. He taught her to sit a horse properly, laughing at her early stubbornness about the whole enterprise. She taught him, in turn, to make her mother's biscuit recipe, the one good thing her father's ruin had never managed to take from her. He brought her, one Sunday, out to see the ranch itself, a modest but well-kept house with good land stretching toward low hills, and showed her the empty second bedroom with an unusual hesitance in his manner. "I built this house for a family I hadn't yet found," he admitted. "I'd about given up hoping I would before Faro Flats." She stood in that quiet room a long while, imagining a life inside it, and found the imagining did not frighten her the way she'd expected such thoughts to frighten a woman raised to expect ruin around every corner. There were harder days, too, days when her father's shame turned to resentment and he accused her, drunk and bitter, of thinking herself too fine now for her own family, of forgetting who'd raised her. She did not forget. She simply, slowly, stopped believing that a father's failures were a debt she owed the rest of her life to repay. Warwick Calloway, for his part, remained mostly a source of shame rather than comfort, drinking through what little money came his way, and Ivy had long since stopped expecting him to change. It was this very weakness, in the end, that brought the trouble to its head. Cyrus Kettering, still smarting from the loss of his prize and the $100 he'd been shamed into accepting, found Warwick Calloway deep in debt to him again within the month, this time over a matter of borrowed money rather than cards, and saw in it a second chance to reclaim what he still, in his own twisted reckoning, believed was rightfully his. He came for Ivy at night, with 2 hired men and a wagon, while Reed was 3 miles off at his own ranch, and her father was too deep in drink at the saloon to notice his daughter was even missing. Ivy woke to a rough hand over her mouth and Kettering's voice, low and ugly in the dark of her rented room, informing her that her father's newest debt made her fair collateral all over again, court or no court, and that this time there'd be no cattleman riding in to buy her back out from under him. She fought harder than any of them expected, raised as she was on a lifetime of managing worse men than these, but 3 against 1 left her dragged half out the window before the boarding house keepers shouting roused the street, and someone thought to ride for Reed Lawton. He arrived at a dead gallop, having ridden the 3 miles in a time that would be talked about in Faro Flats for years after, and found Kettering's wagon already rolling for the town's edge, with Ivy fighting against the ropes at her wrists in the wagon bed. Reed drove his horse alongside at a reckless speed that risked his own neck as much as anyone's, and came off the saddle onto the moving wagon itself, wresting the reins from Kettering's startled hired man before either could draw a weapon, hauling the wagon to a rearing, dust-choked stop. "Cut her loose," Reed said to Kettering, his voice gone low and lethal in a way Ivy had not heard from him before, "or I will finish, right here, what the marshal ought to have started weeks ago." Kettering, faced with a man whose fury had entirely stripped away his earlier composure, and 2 hired hands who had not signed on for a hanging offense, lost his nerve first. He cut the ropes himself, hands shaking, and Reed pulled Ivy free of the wagon bed and into his arms with a fierceness that told her, more clearly than any words could have, exactly how frightened he had been on the ride out. "I have you," he said into her hair again and again, as though repeating it might undo the last terrible hour. "I have you, and no man is taking you anywhere you don't choose to go, not while I've breath left in me to stop it." The marshal arrived shortly after, summoned by the same boarding-house keeper, and Kettering's scheme along with a string of similar debts he'd extracted from desperate men across 3 counties, each one leveraged against a daughter or a wife as collateral, was laid bare and answered for at last. The man run out of the territory entirely before the week was through. Her father, sobered entirely by the sight of what his weakness had nearly cost her, came to her the next morning with a humility she had never once seen from him in 1 and 20 years. "I could have gotten you killed," he said, and for the first time did not look away from her while he said it. "I don't ask you to forgive me, Ivy. I only ask you to believe I understand now exactly what I nearly threw away." She did not forgive him all at once, nor pretend the years of harm undone by a single frightened morning, but she let him stay a while on the porch beside her, and found that was the most either of them could honestly manage, and enough, for now, to begin with. Ivy sat on Reed's porch a week later, healing bruises hidden beneath her sleeves, watching the sun go down gold over land that was. She understood now, not the price of anything, not collateral, not a debt owed by anyone, but simply a place a good man had offered to share with her freely if she wanted it. "You never once asked anything of me these past weeks," she said. "Not even after tonight, not even after the wagon." "I told you at the start I wasn't offering rescue," Reed said. "I meant it then and I mean it now. Whatever you choose, Ivy, you choose it because it's what you want, not because you owe me a debt for saving you twice over. I won't have you feeling bought any more the second time than the first." "Then let me choose plain," she said, turning to face him fully. "Because I find I want exactly this porch, this quiet, this man who never once tried to own what he only ever wanted to protect. I love you, Reed Lawton, freely and entirely, and I'd like very much to marry you if you're still asking." "I'm asking," he said, and the smile that broke across his weathered face was the first entirely unguarded thing she had seen from him since the night he'd stood up in a saloon, and refused to let a cruel man collect a debt that was never rightfully his to claim. They were married that autumn in the small Faro Flats chapel, Ivy walking down the aisle on no man's arm but her own, having decided, with Reed's full and glad agreement, that she had spent quite enough of her life being handed from one man's ledger to another, and intended to arrive at her own wedding exactly as free as she meant to remain for the whole of her married life, chosen, never claimed, loved, never owned.